What's up guys, Shawnthebro here, and today we're going to be going over our command list, our advanced command list mechanics part 2. And so specifically today what we're going to be doing is kind of going over a more professional, a better way to go about the command list. So instead of grabbing the commands directly off of a character, we can grab them from a data table. The data table is going to be faster to store a lot of this logic, and also we can access it from anywhere. A character does not have to be spawned and active. So if I go down to my command list, we have our same logic as before, where we had the ability to now go between our commands and our command list, and you can kind of see what the inputs are, the names are, which one we're on, and we have this video playing. We still are not going to be able to change videos yet. That is coming very soon, I promise, as well as that player controller change I mentioned. So what we're going to be able to do today is set the title of the command list based off of the character we're looking at. It does not have to be the owning character. So we can actually change, if you wanted to change tabs to have other characters, or just have the title up here be automatic based on the character's command list that you're looking at. We're going to be able to write a description that then displays under this video. And we're going to be able to add a lot more data to our commands that doesn't get on our character. This is the really important part, because the reason that we haven't actually set up the videos yet in this one is because the character is right now holding this command array. Okay, so if we go to our base character BP, it's actually in the code that it's being held. However, we set them up in the class defaults in the blueprint. Actually, let's go to the mutant BP, my fault. Base character, of course, won't have anything. So the mutant will have all these individual commands, right? And so they're all in here, and they already have a lot of data in them, a lot of data that the character hauls around with them. Now, they do need access to this character data, because say you use an attack, I need to be able to access the light attack. But there's certain things we don't need to access about the commands right off the character. So one of those things that we absolutely do not need is the description. Video path, the path to load the video on the widget, that does not need to be on the character's command or structure. And so what we can do is set up another structure that is similar to this one, but it's specific to the command list and where we need that data. That way the character's not hauling all that around with them, and we don't have to have all that extra data stored. That's the really important part for today's episode. So that's what we're going to be covering. Alright, so to get started, I'll go ahead and link you to this playlist right here in the top right corner. There's an iCard there. You can click on it. It'll bring you to the first episode of the fighting game tutorial series to now, to current, because that playlist has every episode that we've used to get to where we are in the series. We still have a really long way to go, 146 episodes in, but we've come a really long way from the beginning. So feel free to click on that, get caught up in the series, check out how much we've done. Alternatively, you can go ahead and click on this. If you're just interested in the command list, that's perfectly fine. This should do everything you need. This is the first episode of the command list in our fighting game tutorial series. Alright. And so the first thing we need to do is come up with a structure that can hold all the data we care about, but also is separate from the character. So if we go to our fighter template character.h in the code, we have this f command info, or actually just f command structure right here. This is the structure that has all of our command data. So this right here is perfect. This is exactly what we need, but we don't need everything in here in the data table. And we also, like I said, we don't need everything in the data table in here. So we're going to basically use this as a base, and we're going to make this, we're going to change this up a little bit. That way we can adjust it and make it a little bit easier to edit this data and display it where we need. So you can see already the F command is inheriting from the public F table row base, which means we can use this F command structure when we make a data table. Now I actually set that up in the past. If you don't have that, you can go ahead and add this now. However, we're actually not going to be doing it like that today. I'm going to go into my library, which is where I have my data tables and my structures. Now, you could easily make a data table. If you go add new, miscellaneous, data table, you can use this command right here. Okay, so this data table will have all the variables that are in your structure, and you can go ahead and fill it out. And this is good. If you want to use this, go for it. You can absolutely use this to fill out moves so you don't have to do it on the character. And that is something that we can definitely cover in the future as well. This is super easy, and this is more of an organizational thing because one way or another, the character will reference the data table at some point. So we won't get into all this now, but just so you know, that's an option. So I do recommend having this right in here. Okay, that way we can inherit this structure when making a data table and make a data table out of this. Doing that, you'll be able to make all your commands in a data table instead of on the character directly. But that's not what we're covering today, so I'm going to delete that for now. Just keep that in mind. Keep that in the back of your head. What we're covering today is this other data about the commands, which is going to be specific to the command list, really, and potentially patch notes, things like that, where what we have here is we have a description, we have video paths, we could have extra data that is not involved in the actual gameplay, and we can display that to the user. Now, it doesn't matter which way you're doing it, if you're doing it the way I'm showing you here today, where we have two separate structures, or if you have one structure. You could do it all in one structure. Both of them will work, and we may experiment with both in the future. It's actually very easy to change because you can copy between data tables. So if we want to change it in the future, no stress. So don't worry about all that. I was just showing you examples. But for today, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be making a new structure. I call it F command details. Okay, so I went add new, and I made this a blueprint structure, but it doesn't matter. I just did this because the character is never going to need this structure. So blueprint is perfectly fine. The only reason we usually do in code is so that we can have access to these sort of things. The character and the code in general are never going to need access to that structure if we're using the type of data table that we are here, where we have this data table for this specific purpose. So it doesn't matter if you have a code or a blueprint structure. Once you make the structure, just go ahead and name it. I call it F command details. Since this was F command, I figured this is the commands, but with more data. So I went ahead and opened up my structure, and I added new variables for every variable I think I'm going to need for the command list. So in this specific case, what I'd like to do is I would like to have the name, the input types, the required state, the resulting state, the required meter, max frames between inputs, max frames held, description, video path, and character class. So we're going to go over these one at a time. And the first, actually pretty much all of them except the last three, are directly from the code structure. Okay. So you can do two things here. You can either copy them, copy the names and add them in here, or make new ones. It doesn't matter. What I did is I just typed them all in and made them the corresponding variable type. So I was looking at my code, and I have a name, which is a string. In my structure, I have a name, which is a string. Then we have input types, which is an array of command input. So I have input types, which is command input, and it is an array. So instead of the pill, it is the 3x3 set of squares. So it's an array of command input. Now I have required state, which is an E character state. That is the state that we have to be in to perform this action. So I have required state, which is an E character state variable. Resulting state, which is also an E character state. You can see in the code, I got resulting state, which is an E character state. It's direct copy. Required meter. So how much meter is required to perform this action? It's a float. And I actually called it required meter, spelled it out here, but it doesn't matter. It's a float. Max frames between inputs. I default it to 12 here, but it can be whatever value you want. Again, this could also be a constant. You only need to put max frames between inputs in this structure if you want to be able to change it for specific commands. I do, and I have, so I did put it in there. It defaults to 12 in there. You could feel free to default it to 12 in the structure if you like. It's not required in here because theoretically we'd be filling out all the information. But feel free to do it if you'd like. They can all start it at 12 by just going to your default values here. You may have to open it up and just putting in the value you want. So max frames between inputs, you can put 12. Again, entirely up to you if you want to default it there, but you can feel free to utilize that. Regardless, I have max frames between inputs, which is an integer. Now, notice in the code, I'm actually using an integer 64, int64. It's not needed. So this is used because frames are used as int64s. But really, they're used that way for the global frame count or the current frame count and how high they can get. They can easily go above a standard integers value. However, with that in mind, we don't actually, this max frames between inputs is never going to go above that. So it can actually just be an integer. It does not have to be an int64. So you can think about changing that. However, definitely in this structure, we don't need it to be an int64. So I just made a regular integer. Then I have max frames held, which is really, this is the max frames can be held. I think that makes more sense. And it's also an integer. Okay, and same here. So max frames can be held. It says int64. However, again, it only needs to be an integer here. We're not going to have values that high that these inputs and these commands can be held for. Okay. Now, those are all of the variables from the code structure that we're using. There are some other ones in here that I don't actually use because their current frames held is charging and has used command. So these all have to do with the specific commands, because if multiple commands have the same, like they have similar prerequisites to performing the command, we are keeping track of which ones are charging, how many frames are held if they have to be held for a certain amount of time. And so we have a lot of extra stuff in here on each command that doesn't need to be in the data table or in the blueprint structure. So I actually just ignored them. But I did add 3 other variables that are only in the blueprint structure here. So if you add 3 more variables, I added a description, which is text, a type of text. It could also be a string or a name, and you can convert it. But text is what we're going to use as the description on the widget. So I just made a text variable here so we don't have to convert it. I've added video path. We're not going to set this up today, but this is how we are going to access the different videos. Once we have videos for each of our commands, we can actually use this path to access and change what the source is that is viewing that video. That way the material changes that is on the widget and we watch the correct video. And I actually have a type of file path here. File path is a cool Unreal type. And what it does is it allows us to pick a file path with a little picker tool here, the little ellipsis, and you can click on this and you can go and pick a file. So that'll come in handy in the data table. Then I also have the character class. The character class can be used to determine who this move belongs to, who this command belongs to. Now, if you separate all of your character's moves, like for example, if you have a mutant command data, vanguard command data, mannequin command data, then you're never going to need this character class variable at the bottom. But if you don't, say you put all your commands into one data table, then what you can do is add a character class variable, find an enum, like the eCharacter class, like we have in the base game instance.h here, eCharacter class, that lists off each type of character that we could have. And then we can just tag each of the commands as belonging to that one specific character. That way we can filter out other characters and other commands when we're looking at a specific character type. Now what we want to do after making that structure is make a corresponding data table. So I already have one set up. But the way you make this is you go add new miscellaneous data table, just like we were doing earlier, and you're going to pick your F command details. I don't know why, but structures you make in Blueprint typically show up twice. You can pick either and it will still work, so don't worry. As you can see, they're even at the same file path. So not to worry, pick it and hit OK. You'll get a data table like this. And I called my mutant command data, but you can call it whatever you want. Once you come up with a name, you can go ahead and open it up. And then you can go through and set up all your commands for all your attacks. Now, this is why I was saying if we decide that we want to have a code structure that has all this data as opposed to having two different structures, and we just put all the data in one data table, then we can do that because we are going to copy our commands here if we want to. You can actually copy commands into here. So typically you could copy them from, let's say if we go into our mutant BP, you can go to your character commands, go to an index like index 0, which is my light attack. I can right click on it and I can copy it. Then I can go back to the mutant command data and I can go to a field, right click on it and paste it. Now it's actually going to copy perfectly because it's going to copy all of the fields that it finds that are the same and paste them there. So if it doesn't find it, it's not going to overwrite it. So if I undo this, you can see it changed the name, the input types, it was changing everything. So you can copy these directly from your character commands and paste them in. You will want to do this one at a time as opposed to copying the entire character commands array most likely because these are not a one-to-one structure. And if you don't have data in here, it's not going to work. However, you could literally copy them or paste them like that. You could duplicate rows. You have a lot of freedom here. For me, I just went ahead one at a time and copied these. It only took me about 2 minutes. I just right-click, copied, and then pasted. So it's really quick, so don't worry about it. But yeah, like I said, you can copy them and paste them. It will fill out all the rows that have the same variable name. So it won't try and screw up any rows that it doesn't know what to do with. It won't mess up additional data. You just copy, paste. It's that simple. And you can do this, and this is what I did for all of mine. So I got all my input types, all my names, everything for every command I have on my mutant. The description, video path, and character class, of course, we have to set up because that's specific to this command data. It is not in the character commands array. So that, of course, won't be copied. And also, if you want to name the row, you can. Like by default, they're named new row _ 0, and then they keep going and going. You can just right-click on it and rename the row. And so you can call it the same as the name of the attack if you want. You could also technically get rid of the name column in the structure because you could use the row name as the name. Either way, I typically like to leave name as a separate column whenever I'm doing data tables and just call the row name something similar, probably without spaces and things like that. But really, this is all up to you. Doesn't matter how you do it, just as long as you know how to access these things. So you don't even have to rename them if you don't want. You could leave them the new row the whole time. You can actually use an Excel file or a CSV file to import it. So I have done this. I have shown this off a little bit in the data tables episodes, but what you can actually do is use an Excel file and update the Excel, and then this data will update as well. I've done it all through internal data tables, but if you have someone working on the Excel outside of it, you could actually just keep re-importing it. Anyway, once you get all your data in here, it shouldn't take too long. Then what you can do is write your descriptions and get your video paths and set your character class as needed for all of these. So I went through all my actions and I set the character class to be mutant for all of them because I know this is the mutant command data, so they're all going to be mutant as the type. The description, I just wrote a random description. You could add lore in here. You could add other data. So like you could say required to be triggered from the moving backward state leads you to the blocking state, something like that. You could actually have advantage, disadvantage, frame numbers in here. You can put whatever you want in here. The video path, you then just go and click the ellipsis and select the file you want. So I had a content, movies, command list videos, and I have this video right here, which I've selected and opened. It then puts the path in here. It does do a direct path, which actually isn't an issue here because when this gets packaged, it will know where to go for this path. We'll make sure of that, but we're not going to be doing this just yet. Like I said, we'll do this soon in the near future. But you can go ahead and add your videos now if you want, just so you know where they're all at. And I'll show you any changes that are required to occur to get that stuff working when we get to that point. Either way, I'd make sure you have at least 2 different descriptions. That way you know these are working. And like if you are having the file paths already, you can go ahead and add at least 2 of those before continuing, because if we have even just 2, we can test that it's working as intended. If you want, fill out the entire thing, all the descriptions, and then continue on to the next part. That is up to you. Regardless, once you're done with that, we have our data table for our command details set up. So now we can go into our widget for the command list. Okay, and so quick note of what I've done here. This is the same design as before, except we actually did not have a description in here. I know I had mentioned that, oh, you can put a description here, but I never actually added a text box for it. So I went ahead and added another piece of text to the canvas panel, and I called it the command description text. Make sure it is a variable so we can set the text of it in the widget in the event graph. And then also the character name I'm going to be using today. I'm going to set it to the name of a character through a quick function we make. So you also are going to want to make sure this is a variable. For the description, I haven't changed anything of any real importance. I set up, of course, my font to have my outline size because I think it looks nicer. But you can set everything as you see fit. There's nothing else specific you need to do here. When you're ready, you go into the graph. And I haven't actually changed all this over yet. So I'm going to show you where we're coming from and where we're going, because there's quite a bit that's changing here. Okay, so in event construct of the command list widget, what we were doing was grabbing the owner character, or the owner pawn, casting it to our character, and grabbing the character commands array off of it. Now that's fine, but again, we have extra data that we don't want to be carrying around on the character at all times. So instead of doing all that, what we can actually do instead is this. We can get our data table and grab the specific row, or grab each row, and grab the specific data off each row. All right, so here's how I have it set up. I call get data table row names. And I manually select the asset I want. Right now, we can assume that we want the mutant command data. If we have tabs or the ability to go to all different characters on the same widget without exiting the menu, we are going to have to figure out how to do this. And we can either do it by going into, starting with the character that is the pawn for the player that paused the game, so whoever triggered that menu, or it could be determined, randomly. It could have a set index to start at. It really depends on how you want to do it. For now, we're just going to start it on this value, but of course we can change it later. We're going to drag out. This is going to have every single row name. So it's going to have light attack, medium attack, heavy attack, special attack, new row 3, new row 4, whatever. It's going to just go in that order. So we want to loop through them, just like this. Now, we can drag off of this and get the actual info from the data table row. Okay, so if we type get data table row, we have data table here, which we have to select the data table again, mutant command data. And now we're going to grab the individual row that we want. In this case, in event construct, we're grabbing all the rows to assign the data on the widget. So we don't want to just pick a specific row name, but instead we want to loop through them with the array element, so we grab all of them. Then we can drag off the row that's returned and break it to get all the information about that row. And that is how we get here. This is what I've set up prior. The only other thing here is we have length of this array, because this basically tells us how long the data table is. This is useful because you saw we were using length to set max selections down here off of the character commands array. Well, they should be the same length So, I mean, it's going to work the same either way. It just, we're not using the character commands array anymore, so we need to switch it to this new array. All right, so now what I'm going to do is we actually don't need a character reference anymore in here. If you need it for something, feel free to use it. But again, I'm assuming potentially we could actually use this from the main menu or from somewhere else where characters aren't spawned. So I'm going to get rid of that dependency here. In which case, I'm also going to get rid of the reroute nodes. We'll come back to this. I don't want to delete too much and confuse anybody because it can be confusing. We can keep this open source right here. This is going to change when we update the videos. But if you want to keep the video playing just because it looks pretty nice right now, then feel free to do that. You can keep that in the front. I'm going to move everything else over because we need some space. So specifically what we're going to need here is we need to grab the get data table rows now before we go too far. And, you know, I'll bring everything down here. You know, it might take a little bit of adjusting, but if I make this a little bit cleaner. Okay, so we want to grab the length off of our get data table row names, and we want to use that to set max selections. We don't want to use the character commands one. All right, so we can get rid of the length here, and instead length should go into max selections from here. All right, feel free to clean it up with some reroute nodes. All that good stuff. And we can go row found. Only if we find the row do we want to do this logic for it. All right, now if we try and compile, you're going to see that character commands gives an error because it's got no target. That's fine because we're actually going to get rid of this. And we can get rid of the reroute nodes for that. Let's bring over max selections for a second here. Let's actually make this better because instead of doing this and setting it on a loop, we can remove max selections, put it out front. My apologies, let's move this over. Okay. And what we can do is this now. So we can set max selections to be the length almost immediately after. And we can do some reroute node magic here to kind of clean this up. There we go. And this is good enough. I mean, it doesn't have to be anything crazy. I'm just trying to make it look nice while we're doing it. All right, so we have the length of get data table row names, and that's going into max selections. Then we take the out row names to loop through them. And as long as we find a row, we break the data, and we're going to do all this logic here. Almost none of this logic is actually going to change. We just had to make sure we're using the right data to get that. So I don't need this for each loop anymore because these are basically doing the same thing. We just changed the order up a little bit. So I can get rid of this for loop, but we have to make sure that anything that was going into loop body is now going from the row found, okay? Because row found it goes loop body into here, and then if we find this row, we need to do everything in there. So you can bring row found directly into create command list element widget. And you can technically do this now as well. We had determine selection, which was starting the selected command at the top. That was being done on complete. You can go ahead and drag completed into determine selection right now as well. Then you can disconnect the loop body and the completed, and you're only left with one thing on that for loop. Okay. So I'll bring this over here, keep it a little bit cleaner. The last thing we need to do is figure out what the array element was going into. It was just going into a break. But we've already got that break. It's just a little bit separated. We're not breaking it at the array element. We're breaking it at the row that gets returned from the array element. Okay? So we can delete this for each loop in this break command. And we can move everything over. You're going to have some errors. Don't worry. We're going to fix them up. So compile and save and see what's wrong. So the first thing that's wrong is that we have this for each loop that is trying to create input stack icons, which are the individual icons for, say, you know, left, right, punch, that sort of thing. Well, we have input types here that we can actually use. All right, so this can go directly into here. You can use the reroute node still if you want. So something like that. But you can see that you don't actually need the commands to do that. We have the input types here in the F command details. Now, this toText string, which was setting the command name, so the actual name that shows up on these command list elements here, that needs to take the name of the command in. Well, we have the name here, so we can still do this as well. There we go. The rest of this can actually stay. I have something else down here that I want to show you as an example. And we have one other thing we're going to add to completed, but take another look at this. I will move this out one to clean that up a little bit. So take another look at this. This is our event construct now. You see that we don't use base character BP. We don't have anything like that. We just go ahead and grab it directly from the data table and then set up our logic. We still have to set up set title, but let's make sure that this transfer worked before we go any farther. So let's go play our game. And we can skip through everything, it doesn't matter. Just as long as we go into our command list, and everything should work to the point where we can still move our command, what command we're on. We should still see the video playing. And all the commands should have the right data, and they do. So everything looks good. It looks like everything transferred over from the character commands array into the data table. We removed some dependencies in this widget, and it should also be faster to access them directly from the data table. There's two other things I want to do in this episode. So the first thing is actually really easy. I just want a way to set the title, and that way it's not just saying like name of character up here when we get in. It should say the name of the character that we're looking at. Right now, again, we only have the mutant, but we should set up a function. That way we have a proper method of changing the name and having the players view the page, the widget, with the name of the character already up. So what I've done is I've made a new function, and I've called it set title. So I've added a function, set title. I compiled and saved. That way I can add an input parameter. So I go down to inputs, click plus new parameter, and I've added an eCharacter class parameter. Okay, and what I've done for that is I've used this to determine what name we want to display. All right, so don't worry about this call yet. Just go into the function, set title, and we have this character class. I immediately drag off of the character class and perform a switch on it. Then I grab our character name title, which is this guy right here, and I set the text to be the type of name that we actually expect. Okay, so on the switch, we have all of our character classes. So I have Mannequin, Mutant, and Vanguard right now. Depending on what page we're looking at, we want to be able to see the proper name of Mannequin, Mutant, or Vanguard. So it's very simple. Right now, this is a direct name comparison, but I did this on purpose because you might name these character classes like this might be MQ for Mannequin, or MT for Mutant, or VG for Vanguard. It might not be the actual name you want on there. So if it's not, it's simple. We can just manually set it. Character name title, set text, text, like this. Then you can just type in the name you want. So if it comes from the Mannequin path, for the text, I can put in Mannequin. Okay, and for the Mutant, I did the same. For the Vanguard, I did the same. Now we have to make sure we call this and set the appropriate value. So by default, remember this is all event construct, so this is happening all as soon as this widget opens. Completed, we determine the selection we're on. This is for the actual commands when we're moving up and down them, right? We set that up in the previous episode. I'm going to call set title right after. And I'm going to change my character class to be Mutant. All right. And at this point, you're actually done with the logic here for the event construct, because now you can set everything as intended, and everything should change as intended. It should say Mutant instead of name of character. There's one other thing we need to do, but it's only going to be partially done. So the same reason we haven't done the videos in this episode is the reason we're not going to be finishing the description in this episode. And really, the name is also related to that in a sense. So we have good data here, right? We create all the data initially. when we fill them out. When we have this event construct, we create this command list widget and we set this data and we add these icon images and it looks great. However, the command list element is not storing this specific data yet. It will be. And so it needs to be able to store things like, even though this is the command list element, each index here needs to be able to store a description, the video path, that sort of data, because when we select it, we have to know what we should load. So I can show you an example of setting the description and how it looks on the screen, but it's not going to really work because it won't change as we move up and down the elements right now. So if you'd like an event construct at the start here, you know, before we're done with this loop, okay, before we hit completed, and what I do is I put it right after the add child, the vertical box. I'm just going to bring in my command description text, okay? That is this right here. I'm just going to bring it in. I'm going to get it. I'm going to call set text, again, text, just like we did before. And I'll get these nodes here. Then for the in text, I can go ahead and pass in the text description that we have on the F command details from the data table. So I can bring this over into the set text, I can compile, and I can save. Now when I do this, it is going to work, and it is going to set the description to be the data. I don't have any data in my bottom entry here, so allow me to fix that up real quick. Let's write a description in this bottom field here. So perform X version of, what do we say? From an X version of the light attack. I mean, that's probably fine. It doesn't really matter, as these are just placeholders for me anyway. But perform an X version of the light attack. Now, the reason I had to go back and enter this last entry in here is you saw there was nothing in there when we played the game. That wasn't a bug. It was actually pulling from the last field because it's looping, so it's going to go through all the elements in the data table, and it reached the bottom element, and the bottom element did not have text. So you can see the description is here, but it is not going to change when I change between entries because this is on event construct right now. And so this is only going to work when event construct runs. It's going to run, it's going to get overwritten every time in this loop until the last loop iteration, and that's the text that you're going to see. These individual elements have to hold both the description and the video path from the data table so that we know what to open when we hover over them or when we scroll down to them, not just on event construct. So that's why these things they're not fully finished now. We do have the data in the appropriate spot, and we do have the correct means to access them, but we need to make sure we are sharing that data with the elements themselves. We're going to go over all of that and more in the next command list episode, so stay tuned for that. But I think this is a good entry for today. So anyway, guys, that is all I got for you today. So thank you so much for watching. I'm Shawnthebro. If you enjoyed, please subscribe. It does more for myself and the channel than anything else you can do, and I really appreciate it. I want to give a huge shout out to my YouTube membership and Patreon members and supporters. Thank you guys for thinking of me and taking the extra time to support me. I am really so incredibly grateful, and I cannot wait. I am excited to be able to share these templates with you when I am finished with them. If you had any issues with this tutorial or any of my tutorials, feel free to join the Discord community. I'd be happy to help you, get you sorted so you can keep moving along and working on your game. Otherwise, like I said, that's all I got, guys. So thank you so much for watching. I am Shawnthebro, and I will see you in the next one. Goodbye, guys.